Ticonderoga publication's been going since 1996, and in that time only two of our writers have passed away, touch wood, who are both Sarah Douglas and Stephen Utley, and I'd just like to acknowledge that, hey, we still word to these guys. I was going to give a little bit of a spiel about independent publishing, small press, but I'm sure a bunch of you have heard my sermon from the Mount on that a few times, so I will skip that one over.
Just post it online.
Absolutely, yeah. Today we're going to be launching two fabulous books and also having, not necessarily a launch because it's the year's best Australian fantasy and science fiction.
Horror.
It's fantasy and horror, yeah.
You're now doing science fiction.
Yeah, okay. The year's best Australian fantasy and horror series has been going for 4 years now technically. And it's never really had any sort of big fanfare event, and this isn't going to be it either, but it's not often that we get both editors, one being based in Melbourne, the other one being based in Perth, in the same room together, so we thought we'd briefly celebrate that. So we're going to have that, and I'm going to invite Liz and Tali to come up, and Tali will come up, say a few words about that shortly, then Liz will come up and say lots of stuff because she's also going to be launching her fabulous new anthology called Kisses by Clockwork, and then on that we're going to follow that with some fabulous readings from these people here, and then we're going to get to the other fabulous book we're launching today, which is Janine Webb's Death of the Blue Elephant, which is her first story collection, and I'm really, really proud to be able to be the person here standing up and having made it happen. And then the other Russell in the room, Russell Blackford, is going to come up and tell you all these fabulous things about Janine and the book and why you really want to own one. I have been accused on many times of standing up and talking for far too long and saying far too much, but this really is out of a feeling that I'm getting old. And people around me are starting to pass on, and I kind of start to worry that people will pass on with too few words spoken about them. So if I've ever spoken about you, you can die in peace knowing that I probably never have. Yeah. But please don't die. I did just want to say, we're Ticonderoga Publications is an independent press. And I was thinking today, as I sat here 15 minutes ago looking at an empty room going, oh my God, I hope someone's going to turn up. It's kind of like when Liz is my wife, we got married earlier in the year, and all day people were coming up to me and saying, oh, so, what's it like being married? And, are you worried about the wedding? And it's like, I have no fears that I really am marrying the love of my life, who is a truly wonderful person. But I just hope that we're throwing the right party that everyone will come and enjoy. So there were never any doubts about that, but I hope here we are with some fabulous books, and I hope we're throwing a good party for them. So, small press versus, the big press. And today I decided to define it as an independent press or a small press will pay writers as much as we can afford, not as little as we have to. So bear that in mind. That's my deep thought for the day. I will now, with pleasure, hand over to Tali Helene, the horror editor of the year's best Australian fantasy and horror, who will dazzle you, if not with her fabulous wardrobe, but with also her fantastic thoughts. Thank you, Tali.
Thank you, Russell, and I brought Liz with me, and this is the comedy routine we didn't get to do at the Ariella, so let's get the microphone going up and down.
I'm only wearing 3-inch heels, I promise.
I don't think it's on.
I'm also wearing heels. So we're just going to talk briefly about our anthology, Year's Best Australian Fantasy and Horror. We've got 3 volumes published. We're working on volume 4. We were very, very honoured to win an Ariella Award this year for our volume 3, and I feel it's really an achievement that reflects on all 3 books. So even though the 3rd book was the winner, I really want to thank everyone who's contributed to the entire series, all of our writers, all of the great talented editors and publishers who brought those stories to light in the first place. The beautiful thing about our book is it's such a cross-section and a snapshot of all the talent that's happening in genre in Australia, which is really exciting to be able to work with and honour and bring forward and to celebrate. So, Liz, do you want to say something?
I don't really have a lot to add to that, but I would really like to thank everyone who's been involved, and obviously Tali, my co-editor, has been an awesome person to work with, and we will continue doing, hopefully great things with it over the next however many years that we are working together. So grab a copy of the book when you come up later on and enjoy the stories that are in there.
An addenda to what Russell's morbid segue, I just wanted to especially thank Cat Sparks for that beautiful tribute that we published honouring Paul Hanks, because that was really special and I was thrilled that that book won. So thanks, Cat.
Segue.
Okay, I'm going to segue now into the second technically launch. So Kisses by Clockwork, which is my something anthology, themed anthology. This one is a steampunk romance anthology. So it's got stories that range from the look across the room whilst wearing fabulous steampunk clothing, of course, and having lots of clocks in the background, to something a little bit more steamy, which may not be for people younger than 15, but you'll have to buy a copy and have a look. I won't say too much about this because I do have 3 of my awesome authors here who are going to give you a little taste of what's inside Kisses by Clockwork. So our first author that is going to be reading for us today is Amanda Pillar, who is reading from her amazing story, A Clockwork Heart. Take it away.
All right, I just picked a random part in here, but anyway. It was peaceful, lying like this in the semi-darkness, listening to his breathing and her own, feeling her heartbeat against his. Ticking? Frowning, she pressed her ear harder to his chest. There it was, a distinctive tick, 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 rather than the predicted thump, thump, thump. She jerked backwards. What? Quinton reached an arm out towards her, but she wrenched back, scrambling away, tangling her feet in her discarded dress. Mary? Clutching the cloth of her blue skirt to her chest, she felt herself trembling. You don't have a heartbeat. Mary, I can explain. Fear took hold of her. What had she let into her body?
And to find out more about that fabulous story, you'll have to purchase a copy of the book. Wasn't that a great segue? Okay, our second author who's going to give us a very small taste of her wonderful story today is Angie Rieger, who's going to read from her story, The Law of Love.
I woke to a young woman's hand winding the key inside my chest. 1, 2, 3. The levers that pulled down made my eyelids flutter. 4, 5, 6. My heart was beating. I was alive once more. Flashes of sunlight streamed through the glass I sat behind. I must have been here a long time. The sun had heated my porcelain and fish-scaled skin. I blinked a few times. The woman saw I was animated. There, she said, as pleased as if she made me herself. She yanked her hand out and zipped my chest back up.
Thank you, Angie. That one sounds very intriguing, doesn't it? Our third reader today is Damien White, also known as DC White, who will read a section from his story, South to Glory.
My darling Ashlyn, words cannot describe the feelings of loneliness and regret which well up in my bosom at the sight of the locket you gave me ere my departure to this lonely, desolate, ice-blown, God-forsaken shore. At the thought of ice, Preston Featherston shivered. He leaned out of his overstuffed chair, grabbed the poker and gave the fire a few experimental pokes. It came to life gratifyingly fast. Preston turned to his manservant. What do you think, Bunny? A bit thick? Bunny shook his greying head. I think not, sir, although I would counsel against your somewhat reckless use of the word bosom. For goodness sake, man, this is the 19th century. A chap ought to be able to say bosom to his fiancée without fear of her fainting. Preston waggled his whiskey tumbler by way of punctuation. As far as she's concerned, I'm a rugged Antarctic explorer. That should grant me some licence, surely. Bunny did not comment. Preston sipped his drink and leaned back in his chair. Right, let's press on. Nothing in England could have prepared me for the violence of the climate beneath the Antarctic Circle. We lose men daily. Our local Inuit guide, Umbopo, believes they are being lured away by the spirits of the ice forest, the one I mentioned in my last letter, if you recall. Despite our having to flee from the terrible snow spiders, I've assured the expedition we are men of science and we fear no paranormal terrors. Incidentally, it is quite lucky I had time to write this letter. Normally I wouldn't write until we'd established base camp for the night, but I had a spot of time as we had to backtrack to pick up several of Bunny's fingers, which had dropped off from frostbite. He broke off at the sound of a polite cough. Yes, Bunny? Problem? I'm not writing that, sir. Despite a general reluctance to abandon the feudal system, Preston had long ago learned the wisdom of retaining Bunny's good favour. He took his valet's outburst on the chin. Why ever not? Dash it, I have to ramp up the drama somehow. Can't be snow spiders every week, you know. Well, doubtless, sir, but I would prefer that our return to England from... Bunny glanced around the inside of the Bavarian ski chalet. The South Pole be achieved with all of my digits intact. The man has a point, Preston conceded. All right, what about this? I only just had time to write this letter as we have stopped to mend a puncture on one of our bicycles. Bunny ran over a particularly sharp penguin. I wouldn't run over a penguin, sir. And you haven't, see, that's the beauty of it. Preston beamed. Right, that ought to do it for this week. Just finish off with, I look forward to the day I see you again, hopefully with all limbs intact, mine, not Bunny's, even though I am travelling over the most rugged and dangerous Yeti-infested land in the world. Hugs, kisses, and whatever I can get away with under the stairs, your fiancé, Preston.
So as you can see, we do have a wide variety of different stories encompassing the romantic and steampunk genres. So I hope you enjoy the book. Come up and grab a copy later on and you can get some signatures from these wonderful people. And we will move on to looking at Janine Webb's amazing collection.
I'm just going to take this time to put in a brief advert for the people I'd like to thank, and Ticonderoga would like to thank. I'd especially like to thank my wife Liz, who has put up with me for far too many years being an independent publisher. And I'd like to also, in this same breath, thank all the partners of writers and creative people. You know, sharing a house with a writer, creative person, someone involved in the Australian speculative fiction industry isn't easy. As I'm sure Janine's long-suffering husband Jack Dan would understand. And yeah,
Giving you a dream to live with himself.
Yeah, so partners and family, you know, thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Continuum for allowing us to come along and do this, and all the volunteers and committee who've been running around and having to deal with people doing silly things like writing the wrong room number on their piece of paper, so having to swap over program items and things like that. I'd really also like to take this opportunity to, and I'm sure he will get much praise in coming speeches, Nick Stathopoulos for the beautiful, beautiful cover of Death at the Blue Elephant. And now, before I introduce Russell Blackford, who's going to come up here and officially launch the book, I'd just like to say how I'm really chuffed to be the person up here who's played a part in bringing this book into existence. I scared the living bejesus out of Janine Webb the first time I launched one of her books back in 1998. She and Andrew Enstis had just finished a book called Aliens and Savages, which, if you haven't read it, is a really important book and a really in-depth foray into the fact that Australian literature for many, many centuries has been full of racist bastards. And it's a painful look, but it's a really important book. And at the time I told Janine, you know, look, I'm going to launch it, just bear with me here. And I stood up on here, held up her copy of Aliens and Savages over in Perth and said, I did not enjoy reading this book. The room went dead. And Janine just went, But then, when I explained my reasons why and how it was a fabulous book and well written and well researched and important, people flocked to it and bought it and supported it, because sometimes we do need to hear things that we don't necessarily want to hear. That's not going to be the case here. You want to hear about this because it's a fabulous book, and I'm really, really, really chuffed. Janine, I've known for far too many years now. She is, without doubt, she's just an awesome person for all that she's been through, all the stories that she tells. Few people around have the same sort of love of life and energy and enthusiasm and just crazy ass passion that Janine has. So, and the stories in here. She's also, one of the things I love is travel, and one of the things that Janine loves is travel. I prefer to travel in a little bit more comfort. Janine kind of likes to just about be hanging onto the edge of the plane as it's going through all sorts of weather. And she will go through, the sort of flyer that will go through the worst thing and then go, again. Or the sort of person who just goes driving and then finds herself confronted by armed guards at a checkpoint in Kosovo and goes, oh, cool. But yeah, she is absolutely magnificent. And the stories in here reflect that passion, reflect that love, reflect that travel, and everyone who buys this and reads it will absolutely enjoy it. So without any more of my crap, I will introduce Russell Blackford to officially launch the collection, and then he'll pass on to Janine, who will talk and read, and then we can all throw it all open to throw money at us. We take cash, we take FPOS. This will be $25. Kisses by Clockwork will be $25. Universe Fantasy and Science Fiction is $30 each, or you can get all 3 volumes for $80. And that's enough for me, and thank you everyone for coming along, and over to Russell.
This is a beautiful book. Russ has held up the physical book with the magnificent cover by Nick Stathopoulos. It is a beautiful book, and it is a pleasure and an honour to be launching it today. But it's not just a physically beautiful book, it is a book full of beautiful writing, beautiful stories. I'm just so pleased to be here and to be able to say something about it and get it on its way. I have known Janine for an even longer time than Russ, and I don't consider it that I've known her for too long. I must have...
But Russell, sorry, how long can we know a 21-year-old?
I must have first
Thank you.
I must have first been kind of in the same seminar rooms and stuff as Janine way back in the 1970s. Very, very young indeed. But I first met Janine properly back in 1985 at AussieCon 2. At that stage, Janine was already a brilliant young literary scholar with a string of publications. The first thing I think I read by her was a piece that she actually wrote for the academic track of AussieCon 2, which is a wonderful piece about the monster as hero, which was subsequently published in the proceedings volume of that academic track. Since 1985, she has gone on to fulfil her literary ambition beyond being only a literary scholar. She continues to be an important literary scholar here in Australia, but she has become an important writer of narrative as well, narrative fiction. Her first short story was published in 1997, so she first really made it, publishing professionally, scratching that itch that she'd always had to write fiction. That story was the eponymous Death at the Blue Elephant, and she's gone on since to produce 2 novels and to produce a body of short fiction that's culminated in this wonderful book, which I'm holding up in the version I have, which does not have the Nick Stathopoulos cover, but it's the advanced reading proof. Don't take it away, it's got my notes. But look, this is a wonderful body of work that she's built up. And, apart from the two novels, which we could also talk about, this is a wonderful body of work that she's built up since 1997. There are 5 news stories in this book, but there's this body of work that she has been building up over the years, which I think has not received enough notice in her own country. There are important, very solid, very beautifully crafted stories here that were published in overseas anthologies and probably did not receive the recognition they should have. I think my favourite story in the whole book, although there are so many of them, may be the story called Red City, which was published in an anthology overseas in 2004. A story which would have done Ian Forster in his Passage to India made proud. You know, a beautiful story of humour, of cultural clashes, of character. And a hard science fiction story in its own way. This is another thing about Janine. She's written across the genres. You know, there's hard science fiction elements in there, there's mythic and fantastical elements, there's horror elements. You know, a very broad thinking writer here who's digging into the resources of the genres that we'll celebrate here today. And what I love about the stories is the robustness with which they're written. A number of these stories are at novella length or approaching novella length, which I think is actually a perfect length for much in life science fiction, fantasy, or genre fiction. It's a length which enables you not only to introduce the novel, introduce whatever it is new that makes this different world, but allows you at the same time to develop character, develop the personalities, develop the themes, without feeling you have to pad the thing out to turn into something that someone will take to the beach to read for 2 weeks on their holiday. It is a length that Janine has used again and again, including in the stories that bookend this work, the 2 new stories among the 5 new stories that are the first and last in the collection. And I think as you see Janine using this level, this length of writing, to develop character, to produce robust, solid situations, robust, solid people that you can believe in, while introducing whatever it is that disrupts the normal world. She does that just so well. She's become a master of the craft of writing at that length. Now, I don't know how much time I have. I could talk about Janine for a very long time. I could talk about this book for a very long time. You will find as you read these stories a sense of a very intelligent, very sophisticated voice coming through. You will also find a very generous, joyous voice coming through. Even though some of the stories are actually very dark, you always get this sense of a very generous, sophisticated personality, and there's always an element of joy that comes from these stories. I would like to read just a little bit to try to give some sense of this if I have some time. Yes. To take, let's see, a story called Blake's Angel, which is not actually one of the longest stories in the book, but a very powerful story. It is quite dark in its way, though even in this story you find that generosity and that joy coming through. But let's just take the opening of Blake's Angel. So, inside the iron mesh cage, the angel was shaking. A fine drizzle had begun falling from the steely grey sky, and a sharp wind had sprung up, whirling grit and candy wrappers and greasy food scraps along the grimy alley. The angel shivered. His wings ached where they had been clipped, and he shuddered again at the remembrance of dirty secateurs and the foul breath of the men who had pushed his face into the filthy ground to stifle his screams. He hoped his wounds were not infected. Another bout of trembling took him, a rush of heat and a cold sweat that told him he was hoping against the odds. He tried not to radiate his distress, determined not to call for help. That was how they caught him, dropping their rank net as he struggled with the lock to release Alicia. God only knew what they'd done with her now. The angel seller's booth was at the far end of a ragged line of street traders, obscured by a tangle of ducts and pipes, beside heaps of empty cardboard boxes and wooden shipping pallets, well away from prying eyes. The alley stank of slops from the food vendor stalls, the reek of rotting cabbage and congealing chicken blood, mixing with the pungent smells of heavy spices, of curry leaves and fenugreek and cumin. A tomcat had pissed at one corner of the angel cage, marking territory. and adding to the stink of the neighbouring medicine stall with its stands of tiger balm and antler velvet and rhinoceros horn and bull's pizzles for virility with its ginseng roots and mounds of bark and leaves and its strange homunculi floating in specimen jars. At the front of his booth the trader lounged, smoking a roll-your-own, pausing occasionally to spit through yellow teeth. Once in a while he swiped a damp rag across the grubby, glass-topped counter, displaying angel wares, feathered earrings, necklaces and bracelets of beads and angel feathers, woven angel headbands. A revolving stand offered key rings, bookmarks, pens, and little terracotta angel statues with glued-on feathers. From the grimy striped awning dangled clusters of charms and amulets made of genuine angel products, feathers, hair, skin. There were long single feathers bound with red and gold thread for luck, round wheels of shorter feathers radiating from a bunch of herbs for healing the sick, silver pendants with a lock of angel hair inside for courtship, and at the back, carefully wrapped against the dirt, there were pure white angel feather bridal fans for marital harmony. On an upturned crate behind the stall, a wrinkled old lady sat, sipping tea and muttering to herself, rocking to and fro, while she stitched the recent clippings from the angel's wings into such a fan, a special wedding order. The angel felt sick. Look, I hope I've done justice to the sheer texture and beauty. The way this prose, it takes all of our senses at once to give us a feel of the world. It is beautiful writing, it is a beautiful book. I'm just so pleased to be here to launch it. I hereby declare it launched. This is a great achievement for Janine. It's a culmination of all this work that she's done so beautifully over the last however many years it is now. And I think it's a great achievement for our Spec Fit community here in Australia. I declare you launched Step at the Blue Elephant.
Thank you, Russell. For a while there I thought you were talking about someone else. Yeah, becomes being little. Hardly know what to say after that. But I will say that this collection was conceived late one Saturday night in the bar at Continuum X. I believe some civil malt was involved. So there's a certain poetic symmetry in being able to launch it here today at Continuum 10. I have so many people to thank for this book. I have to start with Russell Farr for taking on the project and doing such a wonderful job of putting it together. There were one or two little disagreements about the table of contents, but you'll be pleased to know that Russell won. To Nick Stathopoulos for such a deliciously wicked cover and such a wonderful tactile cover. To Pam Sargent for her very generous introduction, and to Tanith Lee, Pete Crowther, Rob Shearman and Anna Tamber for equally generous cover quotes. I want to thank all the editors who have worked on these stories over time. A good editor makes all the difference in the world, and I thank you. As I look around the room here, I can see some of the people that I've had the privilege to work with. Jack Dan, of course, Gillian Pollock, Kat Sparks, Simon Porteous, thank you. And as Russell pointed out, a good many of these stories were published first in the States. So also thanks to my US editors, John Helfers, George Zabrowski, Pam Sargent, David Hartwell, Ellen Datlow. Thank you for making these stories the best they can be. Closer to home, my heartfelt thanks to Andrew Estes, who Russell mentioned earlier from Aliens of Savages, who not only taught me to write dialogue, but also spent hours patiently proofreading this collection in all its incarnations. Thank you. And last but not least, thank you to Jack. who's pulling faces at me, for help, support, and boundless enthusiasm. I want to thank you all, and I hope you all enjoy Death at the Blue Elephant. It's been a long time coming. Thank you. After Russell's reading, I'm not sure I did, but Russell Farrer said that I can read a little teaser. So my choice for my favourite story in the book is the novella that closes the book, The Sculptor's Wife. So I want to read just the introduction to that. The first time the sculptor saw the tall, lichen-covered rock, he knew she was in there. Something about the slightly crooked plane of the stone drew him to it. Half buried in landslip on the very edge of the woodland, the sunlit rock seemed somehow to radiate warm promise. He had to have it. He had to have her. The negotiations were easy enough. The couple building their oak-framed house were happy for him to take the big rock. They had no use for it. The excavations for their basement had collapsed a sort of ancient cave, they said, and this odd stone had emerged when they tipped the rubble. They wished him well and hoped to see the sculpture in due course. Moving the stone was harder. But finally, the rock took its place at the centre of his studio, at the centre of his life. Alone with the stone at last, the sculptor caressed it. It warmed to his touch, and he felt his fingers tingle in anticipation. The stone seemed almost to vibrate. He could feel her reaching out to him, wanting him, waiting for him. Slowly, with infinite care, he began to craft the image of his desire. He worked each day until the light failed and his fingers bled. He forgot to eat, forgot to sleep, forgot to do the little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. He was unshaven and haggard. He smelled bad, but his focus was absolute. He was driven. His only waking thought was to create the perfect woman to be his perfect bride. And if he slept, he dreamed only of her. Weeks dragged into months, but finally the day came when his masterwork was complete. Summer sunlight shone through his open window as he watched her, carefully cleaning away the last of the chisel dust with water he'd taken from the Glastonbury well, the well at the world's end, famous for its magical properties. And as he towelled her dry, it seemed to him that the pinkish stone took on a warmer, fleshly hue. At the last, he moistened her full lips with Glastonbury water and fancied that those lips parted just a little. He stepped back, hardly daring to breathe, as he beheld the bride he had always longed for, stone, flesh, perfect. They stood a while in silent tableau, flesh regarding stone, regarding flesh. She opened her eyes. Her eyes were as blue as cornflowers, as he had known they would be. He took her outstretched hand to help her from the pedestal, and the exquisite fingers were warm, as he had known they would be. He led her, newborn, unresisting, to the alcove where he kept his bed. Wordlessly she lay down in love with him, as he had known she would. Later, lying heavily in the crook of his arm, she pushed back her long black curls and spoke her first words. "My name," she said, "is Nimue." The sculptor sat bolt upright in surprise. He hadn't known about that. Nimue? The very same. You've heard of me, of course. The famous enchantress, yes. You may consider yourself enchanted. But Nimue yawned, showing pearly teeth and a tongue as pink as any cat's. "Come along now. You will, of course, be obedient to my wishes. That's how it goes. I'll need rather a lot of things. I'll dictate, and you can make a list. I take it you can write." "But I created you," he protested. "I made you to be my fair lady, my perfect bride. You are supposed to obey me." What an interesting delusion, my dear. Nimue stretched, and the sculptor couldn't help admiring anew her wondrous curves, her flawless skin. "Fact of the matter is," she said, I called you from within the stone to release me, and you obeyed. You've been eager enough until now, obsessed even. I expect your obedience will continue. She smiled. You should know that even the master magician Merlin was no match for me. I trapped him in a cave. He'll never escape. There was more than a trace of smugness in her husky voice. So I'm not expecting any trouble from you. Besides, she added with a chillingly transparent attempt at flirtation, there are some obvious advantages for you. I will, after all, be your wife. She lay back. I'm all yours, my dear. The sculptor shrivelled, his erstwhile ardent flesh no longer willing. She peered down her perfectly chiselled nose. Well, that's not very impressive, she sniffed. You'll have to do better than that. She reached down and took his shrinking flesh in her stone-strong fingers. Here, she said, let me help you. She began kneading him purposefully. I have needs too, you know. It's been a long time. It was no fun at all being stuck in that rock. The sculptor watched in disbelief as his recalcitrant erection grew under her insistent fingers. But I don't, he began. Of course you do, she replied. You will not disappoint me, husband. Do you understand? He could only nod, his mind fogged by the hopeless desire that now overwhelmed rational thought. She mounted him, relentlessly grinding against him, stone against bone. The weight of her almost crushed the life out of him. He found himself fighting for breath. She fell back, sighing, I'm sure you'll learn to please me in time. The sculptor rolled away, his abused flesh red and sore. His chest hurt, his mouth was dry. I'll just go and clean up, he croaked. Shall I bring you some water? Later, she replied, I'm not done with you yet. She reached for him, casually draping one heavy sculpted arm across his torso, pinning his bruised ribs to the sweat-soaked sheets. Here, she said, let me help you. The nightmare began in earnest. Thank you all for coming. Please buy a book so that Russell will eat tonight.
We have to get home somehow.
And enjoy the champagne. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, please, everyone. You can buy books here and get them signed here. Thank you very much, everyone.